So we'll probably have a couple more people popping in the next few minutes, but we can begin. Are there any questions? Practice questions, awakening. Anything.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
So, I don't know if you would call it a stage or something like that, but something like the seeking part just evaporates. Um, but also, and sort of like a lot of the old identity type stuff uh, sort of just disappeared with it. A lot of things relating to work, hobbies, stuff like that. And that's all perfectly fine and great. But it's not like anything really sort of rushed in to like fill its place, even after like quite some time. So there's really not a lot of motivation to, or like sort of energy. It's just sort of a um, coasting and letting things be, and everything's great. So I don't know if that's like a common thing or something that eventually changes. I mean, I guess could be different for anybody, but just curious if you had any thoughts or reflections on that.
On the falling away of seeking and motivation.
Yeah, like I've heard that this is kind of common, and that then like at some point sort of a new motivation or impulse tends to like rise in after some time. Um, I didn't really like buy into that theory necessarily, but I was just, yeah, just seeing if, um, yeah, what you had to say about it.
I haven't found it to be the case. But I don't rule it out. I mean, it just depends on the inclinations of the person. So yeah. What can come or what can follow the falling away of the seeking is it's like these divine impulses replace the motivations which previously came from the ego. So if you're in some line of altruistic work or some type of service oriented um, project or vocation, then there could be more motivation for that, but yeah. If a lot of the selfing that remained was around seeking, then often there's a transition period before there's a sense of what to do next or what to focus on next. But it's a matter of like the old the old operating system dying out. So this new one is, even if it doesn't seem like it's being born, often it's just cooking. Yeah. Like in my case, the previous types of motivations never returned. But I know other people who some new calling comes, and that's very person specific. So,
Yeah.
but it won't come from the same place. So there's a conundrum in the sense that like you're you're looking for what to do next or what's the path forward, but you may be looking for it from a part of you that's just not there anymore. So it's unlikely that it'll come from that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that feels right. Yeah.
But it is a weird place to be, especially, if most of your life you were a certain way and you had certain motivations and now you don't. So it can be tough for sure.
Yeah, I think in my case, um, not really tough, more just like kind of like in a void or something, like just floating.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's definitely normal. Yeah. There's a kind of return effect I've found. I think with awakening there's a kind of it can be a return to earlier callings in one's life or earlier dreams that you may have left behind, or even an earlier version of you that somehow got lost along the way. And those things can come back, but it may just look different. Yeah. But I found that the way that it was before never, it never resurfaced. Like if a lot of your motivation came from trying to prove something or trying to be something other than what you are, that's probably gone. Yeah, so there can also be a kind of grieving process, like the transition or this kind of no man's land in post awakening, where you're like floating through a void. Um, there may be grief underneath things, grief for how you used to be, or grief for how things used to be. Yeah. Yeah, I remember I had some transition where I was like this, and someone pointed out that it was, or they asked me to check if there was grief underneath all of it, and there was. So, but yeah,
I'll contemplate that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with the falling away of seeking, the grief is the grief was that you had such you had such a strong reason to practice, you wanted to awaken, and then after that happens, you're kind of just like, well, now what?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, but even the now what is like, there's sort of a like this loose feeling of the now what, but also it's pretty quickly just seen as some miscellaneous mind content, and it kind of just like just evaporates, you know? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Then
back,
then that oh sorry, continue.
I don't know, just and then it's like, and when I say that void, it's not like a, it's not like a bad void. It's just like there's not really, you know, meaning, purpose, and fulfillment or not fulfillment, or yeah, those kinds of
Yeah.
things. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly, because the meaning and purpose was tied to a self that is gone. So a new even if meaning and purpose returns, it's not possible to see it other than just thought. Yeah, like, okay, awakening, now what? That's a thought. What's next? That's a thought, you know?
yep,
So that's the inescapable like razor of the whole thing. And now you see clearly that everything is thought and feeling.
exactly. Yeah.
So, but yeah, looks like things have unfolded for you since last time I saw you.
Yeah, yeah, just kind of um I think Peter Brown really cracked the door open with your guidance, and then it just did its thing, you know.
Right. Yeah, thank God for Peter Brown. That's for
Yes,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, if anyone here hasn't read Dirty Enlightenment, I highly recommend it. Yoga of Radiant Presence is the language can be dense for some people, but Dirty Enlightenment is the story of his life. So it's a little easier as far as the language is concerned. And it's a Q&A. There's a whole the half the book is a Q&A, whereas Yoga of Radiant Presence is really just an explanation and a commentary. So
yeah. What's really funny about it is like when I needed, or like when I was seeking hard, I really wanted to understand the book and I couldn't. And now when I pick it up, like it just everything makes is like perfectly clear that I don't need it anymore. Like I don't, you know, I enjoy it because it's just um beautiful, you know, and so accurate and clean and precise, and um but it's totally different. I know it's weird. Like all the books I think are like that. You just pick them up and you're like, yeah, 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 I know. Instead of trying to like figure them out or something.
hmm yeah. Someone asked me, why do you still do meditation retreats? And I said for entertainment purposes. Yeah, you don't need to read things for confirmation, but yeah, it's just to see, what's in the pages. So one of the because I met Peter just a few months before he passed away, and I asked him, so from when your awakening happened in the hospital bed. He was recovering from cancer, and I think he was in his late 40s, if I recall correctly. And he said this orb entered through the window, and the fractal nature of reality was revealed. He just left it at that, um, at least in the book. And so when I was with him in person, I asked him, so from that day until now, would you say that the awakening has been the same, or that it's deepened? And he had an interesting answer. He said, always deepening, always deepening. So yeah, he didn't like to answer things in terms of time. Like he really, if you listen to his stuff, it's always just pointing to the field of experience now. But a couple months after he died, I had a dream where he had a conversation in a dream with Peter Brown, and I asked him because he never talked about things in terms of falling away or anything with time. So I asked him, so would you say that the cessation of the narrative occurs in time? And he was like, yeah, I'd say that. Because one of his pointers was, with a lot of the mm, teachings in this field, there's the presentation that, like, the reality of the narrative is just blown out completely. It doesn't exist anymore. So people would come to him and be like, hey, I still believe my stuff. Like this can't be it. And he would just say, yeah, this is it. That stuff, quote unquote, the thoughts and the feelings and the analysis of things, that is all radiant presence. The field of experience is appearing as that. And he would just leave it at that. Because he didn't want to give you a goal. But I've also found this particular point to be true. Like the recognition of this occurs at a specific moment in time, and we refer to that as awakening. But these habitual mental patterns and processes, their reality may not come undone immediately. So in the beginning, you have this shift, and you're like, "Did it really happen? This can't, it can't be this simple. Like it's just impossible for it to be this simple. It's just this." But I'm still thinking all my stuff. I still have my hangups. I still have my problems. I still have a sense of self. So if that's present, this can't be it. And Peter would say, well, your sense of self is just another event in this.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like before awakening, reality wasn't the case. And then after awakening, reality becomes the case. It was always reality.
Yeah, one thing doesn't get extinguished and then the other is like comes forward. It just they're coexisting and maybe attention's blowing one or the other out.
Yeah, it's similar to becoming lucid in a dream. You know, you're in a dream and then you find yourself awake in your dream. So the quality of being awake and the quality of knowing that you're dreaming is what has been introduced into the dream. It's an event. And with that event, there's now a knowing, right, that everything you're touching is your dreamscape. It's the same with awakening in the waking state. Like when you have this recognition, you begin to see and taste very clearly that everything's the same field of experience, that everything's illumination. And yeah, short of like dementia or something or some kind of traumatic brain injury, it doesn't seem to be reversible. So it doesn't mean that you're aware all the time. You know, that's just another thing that you can train, you know, but it's not the realization itself, because even even before awakening, you can make your mindfulness really strong and become aware all the time if you know your life is not particularly busy and you're meditating a lot. But the recognition is very particular, in that it's the basis for liberation. Because prior to it, it's like you're aware, you know, you're being mindful. But after the fact, you see that being aware is another event. It's another thing that is happening, you know. Your dreams are examples of consciousness without awareness. It just happens to be the case that after awakening, there's a whole lot more of it than there was previously. Yeah, the liberation is in seeing that the you that is seeking or that is analyzing is a nexus of processes arising in this. Yeah, when you orient more towards this and more towards the field of experience itself, as opposed to your narratives and interpretations, that's when the freedom sets in, and you have the sense that yourself or your motivations are falling away. You know, you're seeing that they're processes. They're not real. Yeah, in the same way that when you're in a dream, you don't take the situations in dreams as having legitimate reality. That tends to become the case uh, in waking life. Sure, there's still things that you'll get annoyed or upset about or feel things about, but then you see that it's all that is still just happening in this. It's a really good point. There was a Facebook exchange between Peter Brown and another non-dual teacher. Um, Joan Tollefson, I think. And she was talking about like, you know, what about after awakening? What about showing up for your family and showing up for your kids and all the things that are happening in the world, you know, the wars and whatever, various crises. And The great thing about Peter was that he was so radical. He was just like, yeah, but all of that is radiant presence. All of that is illumination. It's not apart from consciousness. We're just giving it words like chair, table, crisis, pain, suffering, bliss, showing up for your family, whatever. It's all the same thing, appearing as that. So it's really at that point that you can begin to confront or experience afflictions and difficulties differently. Yeah, when you're able to see and experience them as the field, as opposed to whatever it is you're designating it to be, and whatever the narratives in your mind are saying about it. You can begin to taste presence in those things, knowing that they actually are the same presence. Yeah, it's a common point that people make actually. They're like, yeah, well, what about the relative world? Whatever it is we're defining as the relative world is this. There's not actually an absolute view and a relative view, or an absolute reality and a relative reality. There's just reality. What we're defining as relative is from the perspective of objects and narratives, all of which are the same field. The wars and the angels and the demons and the bliss, whatever it is, actually is. It's all God. It's all experience. So I'll get into we're going to end class at the hour mark, because I'm flying back to the US um, like 2 hours or something like that. Oh, in 3 hours. So yeah, but it's interesting. I was remembering the past. So like in our last class, I talked about going on this bike ride and how all of this began for me essentially. And I was thinking about the dreams and the motivation that I had back then. In the beginning, it wasn't even about enlightenment. I really had this thought that, or had this insight or something that, like, yeah, the people who helped people the most were the sages, like the ones that produce the greatest net benefit for humanity, in my opinion, were these enlightened men and women of the past. And I saw their effect, throughout history. And I thought, yeah, I hope I can be one of those people, because that's the way to help the most people. So initially it was just about wanting to help people. And then the awakening, enlightenment, whatever path stuff came out of that. But initially the motivation was, I just had some strange heart opening at the time, and I just felt compelled to share it with people. Yeah, so at that time I had this massive power that was flowing through me from that want to help other people. And this was before my dad died, so I thought, if I could become this enlightened or awakened person, I'd be able to save my father from his addiction. And so that was a big motivator. So I had all these dreams of like what I'd become, right? And yeah, there was so much power at that time, even though it was coming from wanting to prove something and wanting to be something else. And I became that something else in time. So when he died, you know, that sense that I could do anything and that anything was possible, and that power that had come to me, it was like God had just dropped something in my body or in my mind. I just had this like endless drive, you know. And then he died and it all vanished. And my life as a practitioner began. But I was remembering that powerful, overwhelming, unconditional love that was pouring out of me. And I remember that even though I had lost it, or I thought I lost it, when the first shift into non-duality happened, there was a out of body experience where I was in the room. Actually, I wasn't out of body yet, but my astral vision turned on and Jesus was standing in front of me. And I'm not a Christian, so but yeah, Jesus was there. And this like bomb of the same unconditional love just filled everything. And this divine fire or holy fire descended onto my head and seeped into my heart. And it wasn't the first time I touched that. When I was 10, I was apprehended for shoplifting. And yeah, I thought I was going to be taken off to jail or something like that. But loss prevention officer just probably pretended to write up this long report just to kind of, you know, scare some sense into me. And my dad came at some point and he took me home. And the whole ride, I thought that he wasn't gonna, they wasn't gonna love me anymore. And he took me to my room and he said, "Did you think I wasn't gonna love you anymore?" And of course, I started crying. And he put me against the wall, and he got down on his knee, and my dad had this like he had these piercing green eyes, and he always smelled like Marlboro Reds, and he had this beard, and he looked at me and he said, "Son, I'll always love you, no matter what you do." And then he gave me a hug and said, "But you're grounded until further notice." And that like redeeming love was the same thing I experienced, with that descent of the holy fire. And it's interesting because it's been so many years since that time in my life where that unconditional love was so palpable. And with the awakening and with all the practice that I did, apparently, yeah, and all the shift into the non-dual and all these unusual things that I'm able to do, I really became that something else that I so badly wanted to be. And still, it pales in comparison to that redemption I felt when he looked at me in my eyes that day. And I was sitting here on the balcony and like time was warped, and it was like this moment and the fire from the master and that moment with my dad, and then all these other moments where I had felt so much love from people. It all just became like one thing. And I realized that yeah, there's no amount of non-duality or no self or emptiness that trumps that perfection. So in the same way that the field appears as all the awful things that happen, it also appears as the most profound things that happen. And I realized that even despite all of this, becoming aware and having lost the sense of duality, or even the realization that none of this is actually here, or that visceral understanding that none of this is actually happening and nothing ever happened. There's so much freedom in that, but even that freedom doesn't touch that love, that divine power. There's a reason you're seeking, there's a reason you began all of this. It was to find yourself, it was to find your purpose. It was to awaken from the dream of your life. But I think without this, heart, there are going to be times where you sense you're still in the desert. It's clear, if any of you've had a near-death experience and you get that life review and you see everything, you experience and see everything happening all at once. It's so clear that it was all just love. That you got married because you wanted love, you had kids because that's probably the deepest love that's possible, at least for a human. But in that review, you see the whole field as this love that's so beyond reasons and conditions and yourself. And it dawned on me that that's what I had forgotten, despite the awakening, despite the non-duality. Not that anything was, missing in my direct sense of it, but I was thinking, like, where did that power go? And because the power was tied to my ego at the time, it's easy to miss it right here, right now. You think, or I definitely thought, was under the impression that it was tied in a way to the person that I was. And it's just not the case. Like all the love that we think and feel we get from other people is actually literally happening in you. It's happening in us. So people ask me different questions about how to get through the abyss or how to deal with their problems. And so many times I don't have really good answers. I tell them to like taste, experience, or really come to know the presence and what's happening or what's there. But I think so much of what a person feels is wrong or is missing is just a absence of that divine power, or better put would be a non-recognition of it. Reminds me too of that, there was a difficult period I had. Um, it might have been 3 years ago now. Yeah, it was probably 3 years ago. Sorry, robocall. I had this strange dream, and in the dream, this phone call came, and when I picked up the phone, the dream reality split into two realities. So imagine having two dreams simultaneously, or imagine being in the waking state and being in the dream at the same time. So it may be a difficult thing to conceive. I hadn't experienced it many times up to that point. Um, so in one reality, in the dream, I'm totally unaware of what's going on. So I'm not lucid at all. And then in the second reality, I'm in that place that's outside time, or before birth and after birth, or before birth and after death. And the me that was there was calling me in the dream. And they said to me, if you live your life according to the plan, or to what you have decided upon, your life will be full of happiness and joy. If you don't live according to what you've decided upon, and by you, it was saying like them and me, they were the same thing. If you don't live according to what you/we have decided upon, your life will be full of misery and suffering. Suffering is by design to bring you back to your original plan. We love you. We're always here for you. Goodbye. Click. And that whole second reality disappeared, and I was back in the dream, and I was like, what? And then I woke up and I remembered the whole thing. And so the part that stuck out was this original plan thing. I'm like, what is that? That the alignment with awakening, is that destiny? Is there actually this thing called destiny? Are the Vedic astrologers correct? Is there really a pathway through time that if you steer too far from the left or you steer too far to the right, you start to suffer immensely? Is that really the case? So my mind went to that, and it just completely forgot about the part that said, we love you, we're here for you. Goodbye. Because that's never something I'd say to myself. I'd never say I love you to myself. It's just a strange thought to even consider. But that's what was so characteristic of that. I don't want to call it a place, that doesn't capture it right, but that consciousness. We love you, we're here for you. Always. That's the grace and the orchestration of synchronicity that is so unexplainable and mysterious in this whole process. How you were led to the right person or the right book and then suddenly nothing is ever the same. It's too strange of a rabbit hole to go down because you end up having more questions by considering that. The odds that you or me of all people have stumbled into this profound lucidity and freedom. We have no explanation for it, so we just say it's chance. But I found there was an explanation. It wasn't by accident. So when you're in the abyss or you're going through these difficulties in post-awakening, remember there's something mysterious, something you haven't been able to put your finger on somehow has been leaving these breadcrumbs. And those breadcrumbs led you to this. And I found that what's leaving those breadcrumbs that divine order, the masters of consciousness, the gurus, they're the emanation, the manifestation of God's love, of that redemption that I received from my dad, that I received from Christ, and that the field was appearing as those things. It's always been the same room. It's always been your trip. But certain things need to happen so that you can remember what this is. And the fact that that remembering happens at all is the result of love. Because it wasn't an accident. And from what I've seen, it was planned. All right. That's the hour, everybody. I'm gonna stop the, actually, yeah, I should. I shouldn't be late. All right.